Caleb Mercer stood on the wooden platform of the depot in Red Rock, his back to the wind. He was a man built of long, heavy bones and silence. In his early 30s, he carried himself with the careful economy of someone who knew that wasted motion cost energy. And energy was the only currency that mattered when winter came. He wore a coat that had been mended 3 times at the elbow. His hat was pulled low, shading eyes the color of wet slate. A jagged white scar ran from his left ear down to his jawline, a memory of a night in Abilene he never spoke of. Today, Caleb Mercer was waiting for a wife. The notion sat uneasily in his stomach. He was not a man given to flights of fancy. He was a man of ledgers and fence lines. He had a quarter section of land, a small herd of cattle, and a cabin that was too quiet when the sun went down. The Homestead Act required proof of improvement, but survival required a partner. He needed someone to manage the garden, to cure the meat, to keep the fire when he was miles out checking the herd. So he had written the letter. He had been honest. He had asked for a woman who was practical, plain, and willing to work. He had offered respect and a roof. The letter from Miss Mara Quinn had been brief. Written in a tight, angular hand, she described herself as 26 years old, healthy, and accustomed to hard labor. She claimed to seek a quiet life away from the city. That was all Caleb knew about the woman who would become his wife. The stagecoach appeared as a smudge of brown dust against the bruised purple of the horizon. Caleb watched it grow. The sound of the wheels grinding against the rutted earth reached him before the horses did. When the stage finally halted, the horses stood with their heads down, their flanks heaving steam into the chill air. The door swung open. A salesman in a plaid suit stepped out first, dusting his bowler hat with an air of offended dignity. Then she emerged. Caleb took a step forward, then he stopped. The woman who stepped down onto the dusty street did not match the picture he had built in his mind. He had expected someone soft, perhaps a little downtrodden, a woman fading into the background of her own life. Mara Quinn was not fading. She hit the ground with a solid thump of boots that had been resoled until the leather was barely there. She was tall. Her body was lean and roped with muscle under a dark travel-stained dress that was 2 seasons out of style. Her hair had come loose from its pins, a dark, tangled warning around a face that was burned by the sun and stripped of all vanity. But it was her eyes that stopped Caleb cold. She looked around the town not with curiosity, but with the sharp, darting gaze of a coyote measuring the distance to the fence line. She was checking the exits. Caleb forced himself to move. He walked toward her, removing his hat. The wind immediately whipped his dark hair across his forehead. "Miss Quinn," he said. It was not a question. She turned to him. Her eyes were green but dark, like moss in a deep well. There was no shyness in them, only a calculation that made Caleb feel as though he were being appraised for parts. "You are Mercer," she said. Her voice was low, raspy from the dust of the road. "I am." He felt suddenly large and clumsy. "The wagon is this way. I trust your journey was tolerable." She did not answer the pleasantry. Instead, she looked past him, scanning the street where a few locals were loitering outside the saloon. "How far is the claim?" 12 miles, Caleb said. "Mostly open country, water. We have a creek that runs year-round and a well near the house." She nodded, a single sharp dip of her chin. Then she looked him dead in the eye. Her gaze dropped to his hands, then back to his face. "Do you drink, Mr. Mercer?" Caleb blinked. "I have a whiskey now and then, never to excess. And your temper?" The question was thrown like a knife waited to stick. "Do you hit women when the whiskey is in you, or do you do it when you are sober?" The air between them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Caleb felt a flush of heat crawl up his neck, a mix of embarrassment and sudden defensive anger. He saw the salesman pausing to listen. He saw Mrs. Gable, the town gossip, peering through the window of the dressmaker's shop. "I do not hit women," Caleb said. His voice dropped to a rumble that he hoped only she could hear. "Drunk or sober. I wrote you that I was a decent man. I meant it." Mara held his gaze for a long second, searching for the lie. When she did not find it immediately, she exhaled. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. "Good. Then let us load the trunk. I have very little." She turned and hauled a battered leather trunk from the boot of the stage before Caleb could reach it. She swung it down with a grunt of effort, refusing to let the driver help her. Caleb stepped in, taking the weight from her hands. Her fingers brushed his, rough, calloused, and cold. She snatched her hand back as if he had burned her. I can manage, she said. I know you can, Caleb said, hoisting the trunk onto his shoulder. But I am here, so you do not have to. As they walked through town toward his wagon, Caleb felt the weight of the townspeople's eyes. In a place like Red Rock, a mail-order bride was news. A bride who looked like she had walked out of a whirlwind was a scandal. He heard the whispers as they passed the mercantile. Look at her hems, a woman murmured. Ragged as a beggar, eyes like a cornered cat, another added. A man chuckled. Mercer got himself a wild one. Caleb's jaw tightened, but when he looked at Mara, she held her head high. Her spine was stiff as a rifle barrel. She did not look down. She did not acknowledge them. But Caleb saw the way her knuckles were white where she gripped her reticule. She heard them. She simply refused to bleed in front of them. And in that moment, Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a strange, reluctant pull. He had wanted a plain, quiet wife to sit by the fire in men's shirts. Instead, he had this woman who walked through judgment as if it were merely bad weather. What secrets was she hiding behind those moss-green eyes? And more importantly, what was she running from? The ride to the homestead took 3 hours through open country that seemed to stretch to the edge of the world. The landscape was rolling hills of sheen and scrub brush, giving way to the broken teeth of the badlands in the distance. The wind was relentless. It tore at Mara's shawl, but she did not pull it tighter. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, watching the horizon. Caleb noticed something strange. Her hands were shaking. At first, he thought it was the cold. Then as the wagon hit a rut and she grabbed the bench to steady herself, he saw the tremor was deeper than that. It was the shaking of a muscle held too tight for too long. She was exhausted. She looked like someone who had not slept in a week, someone running on pure distilled will. There is food in the sack behind the seat, Caleb said, breaking the silence. Biscuits and dried beef. I am not hungry, she said. Her stomach growled loud enough to be heard over the creak of the wheels. She ignored it. Eat, Caleb said gently. The wind takes the heat out of you. You cannot work if you are empty. She hesitated, then reached back and took a piece of hardtack biscuit. She ate it slowly, guarding the food with her hand as if she expected someone to snatch it away. That small gesture told Caleb more than any words could. This woman had known hunger, real hunger, the kind that changes how you see the world. Where are you from, Miss Quinn? Your letter said Kansas. I was in Kansas for a time, she said. Before that, other places. And what brings a woman like you to a place like this? She turned to him, her eyes narrowing. A woman like me? A woman who knows horses and reads weather, Caleb said. Most mail-order brides are city girls looking for a storybook life. You look like you know exactly what this life is. I know that the world is hard everywhere, Mara said, and I know that a marriage contract is safer than being alone on the road. I want a roof that locks, Mr. Mercer, and I want work that belongs to me, that is all. Caleb, he said, my name is Caleb. She did not say his name back. The sun began to dip, bleeding crimson across the underside of the storm clouds. The temperature plummeted. Coyotes began to sing in the coulees, their yips echoing off the rocks. At the sound, Mara stiffened. Her hand went to her throat, touching something hidden beneath her high collar. Just coyotes, Caleb said. They will not come near the wagon. I know what they are, she whispered. But she did not relax until the sound faded. They reached the ranch line just as the light was failing. The cabin sat in a shallow depression, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods. It was a solid structure of hewn logs with a stone chimney and a sod roof. A barn and corral stood 50 yards away. Caleb pulled the team to a halt. Home, he said. Mara looked at the cabin. She let out a breath that ghosted white in the air. It has a solid door. Oak, Caleb said, and a crossbar. She nodded and climbed down. Her legs buckled when she hit the ground, but she caught herself on the wheel before Caleb could reach her. She pushed herself upright and began to unbuckle the traces on the horses. Go inside, Caleb said. I will tend the team. We share the work, she said through gritted teeth. That is the deal. The deal starts tomorrow, Caleb said firmly. Tonight you go inside and light the stove. The wood is in the box. Go. She looked ready to argue, but the cold was biting through her thin dress. She turned and marched to the cabin. By the time Caleb came in, the iron stove was ticking with heat. A lantern cast a golden glow over the single room. It was a tidy space, a table, two chairs, a washstand, and a bed in the corner covered in a buffalo robe. Mara was standing by the window, looking out into the dark. She had not taken off her coat. Caleb hung his hat on a peg. The intimacy of the room felt sudden and overwhelming. He had lived here for 4 or 5 years. Now this wild, sharp-edged woman was standing in his kitchen, filling the space with her tension. "The bed is yours," Caleb said, gesturing to the corner. "I made up a pallet on the floor for myself." Mara turned. Her eyes were wide. "I do not need your charity. We are married. People will expect—" "We are married on paper," Caleb interrupted. "We have not stood before the preacher yet." "I will not touch you, Mara, not until you are ready, and not until it is done right in the eyes of the town. You take the bed. You need the sleep." She stared at him, confusion warring with relief on her face. "Why? Because I am not the man you have known before," Caleb said. He moved to the washstand and poured water from the pitcher into the basin. He rolled up his sleeves. On his right knuckle, a scrape from the harness buckle was oozing a bright bead of blood. He dipped his hands into the water. He felt her eyes on him. She was watching him wash the blood away. Her gaze fixed on his hands, large, scarred, but moving with deliberate gentleness. "You are bleeding," she said. "It is nothing," Caleb said. He dried his hands on a rough towel. He moved to the stove and ladled stew from the pot he had left simmering. He filled 2 tin plates. He set one on the table, then paused and added a second large scoop of potatoes and beef to her plate. He placed it at the seat nearest the fire. "Sit," he said. They ate in silence. Mara ate quickly, wiping the plate clean with a piece of bread. Caleb watched her, noting the way she kept her back to the solid log wall. Her eyes flicked to the window every time the wind rattled the frame. When they finished, Caleb lay on his bedroll on the floorboards. He listened to the sounds of the house, the wind outside, the settling of the logs, and the sound of the strange woman in his bed. She was breathing in shallow, jagged rhythms. She was asleep. But even in sleep, she sounded like she was running. What had broken this woman so badly that she flinched at kindness? And could he ever earn enough trust for her to tell him the truth? The next morning broke gray and iron hard. The wind had not ceased. It had sharpened. They drank black coffee that was thick enough to chew. Mara looked better after a few hours of sleep, though the shadows under her eyes were still dark bruises. She had braided her hair tight against her skull and put on a heavy canvas jacket Caleb had offered her. It swallowed her frame, but she rolled the cuffs up without complaint. "We have to ride out to the north line today," Caleb said. "I need to check the fencing in the box canyon before the weather turns bad for good. It will be a hard day." "I can ride," she said. "I do not doubt it." They rode out on 2 saddle horses. Caleb rode a roan gelding, and he put Mara on a steady mare named Bess. As he had suspected, she sat a horse as if she had been born in the saddle. Her body moved in perfect fluid sync with the animal's gait. That was not the riding of a Kansas City girl. About 3 miles from the ranch, they saw a rider approaching. It was Old Man Titus, a neighbor who lived in a dugout 10 miles to the east. He pulled his mule up as they neared. Titus was a collection of rags and beard with eyes that had seen too much sun. "Mercer," Titus croaked, nodding. He looked at Mara, his eyes widening. "And this must be the bride." "Miss Quinn," Caleb said. "This is Titus." Mara nodded but did not speak. She moved her horse slightly so that Caleb was between her and the stranger. "You got word yet?" Titus asked, ignoring her and looking at Caleb. "Word of what?" "Roar." Titus spat the name. "Silas Roar's boys were through here yesterday checking brands. Said they were looking for rustlers. But they were looking at everything else too." Caleb frowned. "My claim is clear. I owe no man." "Doesn't matter to Roar," Titus said. He lowered his voice, leaning over his saddle horn. "And he has got a new deputy in his pocket. Man named Hale, mean as a rattlesnake." Titus cast a sideways glance at Mara. "You be careful, Caleb. A wild woman brings wild trouble. Roar notices anything that don't fit. Best you keep her close or send her back before she draws his eye." Caleb felt a flash of anger. "Miss Quinn is my concern, Titus. You worry about your own stock." Titus shrugged. Just saying, the wind carries sense, Mercer. And Roar is a wolf. He kicked his mule and rode on. Mara was silent as they continued riding. Caleb glanced at her. Her jaw was set so hard, a muscle jumped in her cheek. "Who is Roar?" she asked finally. "A rich man who thinks he is a king," Caleb said. "He owns half the valley. He likes to think he owns the people in it too." "And does he?" "Not me," Caleb said, "and not you." They reached the box canyon by noon. The walls rose up steep and red, cutting off the wind. They spent hours mending the wire fence that kept Caleb's cattle from wandering into the treacherous ravines beyond. Mara worked beside him, stretching the wire, holding the post while he hammered. She was strong for her size, and she did not complain when the barbs tore at her gloves. That afternoon, a heifer got herself tangled in a mess of old barbed wire down in the creek bed. Caleb was struggling with the cutters. The wire was deeply embedded in the animal's thick hide. The heifer was thrashing. Dangerous and panicked. "Hold her head!" Caleb shouted. Mara did not just hold the head. She grabbed a length of rope from the saddlebag, moved in close to the kicking hooves, and threw a knot around the animal's back legs with a speed that blurred in the air. She cinched it tight, immobilizing the heifer instantly. Caleb cut the wire free and stepped back, breathing hard. The heifer scrambled up and bolted. Caleb looked at the knot in the rope before untying it. He looked at Mara. "That is a packer's knot," Caleb said. "Where did a woman from Kansas learn to tie down 1,000 pounds of beef?" Mara froze for a second, then continued brushing at her skirt. "I watched men work," she said. "I learned fast." "You shoot fast too," Caleb said. "I saw you take the head off a rattlesnake yesterday at 20 paces with a revolver." "That is not watching. That is doing." She stopped moving. She straightened, meeting his gaze. The wind whipped strands of dark hair across her face. "Do you want me to be helpless, Mr. Mercer? Would you prefer I scream when the snake strikes?" "No," Caleb said quietly. "I want to know who is watching my back." "A woman who wants to live," she said. "That is all you need to know." But it was not all, and they both knew it. By mid-afternoon, the sky turned a bruised, sickly green. The air pressure dropped so fast Caleb's ears popped. "Storm," Mara said, pointing. "It is moving fast." A wall of white was rushing toward them from the north, consuming the landscape. "We need to get back," Caleb said. Now, they mounted up and spurred the horses into a gallop. They were halfway home when the storm hit. It was not snow, it was hail. Stones the size of marbles driving sideways on a 60-mile-per-hour wind. The horses panicked. The roar was deafening. The ground, already slick with freezing rain, turned to grease. They reached a washout, a dry creek bed that was now a torrent of mud and ice water. The trail narrowed dangerously along the edge. "Keep close," Caleb shouted over the roar. Mara's mare slipped. The back legs went out, sliding toward the drop-off into the churning water below. The horse screamed, scrabbling for purchase. Mara was thrown sideways, half out of the saddle. She clung to the mane, her legs dangling over the edge. "Mara!" Caleb yelled. He drove his horse alongside, risking his own footing. He reached out, his hand closed around her upper arm, and then something happened that Caleb would never forget. At the contact, she froze. It was not a hesitation. It was a total shutdown. Her eyes went wide and vacant. Her breath hitched in a terrified gasp. Her muscles locked rigid. She did not reach for him. She stared at his hand, gripping her arm as if it were a shackle. In that split second, Caleb saw it. The sheer, blinding terror of a woman who has learned that a man's grip means pain. "I have you," Caleb roared, his voice cut through the storm in her panic. "I have you, Mara. Let go of the mane. I have you." She blinked. The present moment crashed back in. She looked at his face, wet with rain, eyes wide with fear. Not for himself, for her. She forced herself to exhale, forced her fingers to uncurl from the horse's mane. Caleb hauled her backward with a grunt of effort, pulling her clear of the mare just as the horse found its footing and scrambled up the bank. Mara slammed into Caleb's chest. Her body was shaking violently. He did not let go. He held her firmly against him, steadying her as the horses huddled together against the hail. "I have you," he repeated, softer now, though the wind still screamed. "You are safe," she leaned into him, just for a moment, her forehead pressing against his wet coat. She was trembling, but she was not pulling away. For the first time since she had stepped off the stage, she was not checking the exits. She was just holding on. Over the next few weeks, a strange tentative domesticity began to take root in the cabin. It was not the soft, decorative home life of the magazines. It was a partnership of survival. Mara began to change the space. She mixed mud and straw and patched the drafty cracks around the window frame, stopping the whistle of the wind. She found a patch of hardy sage and wild mint near the creek and transplanted them into a wooden box by the door. She took Caleb's torn shirts, the ones he had clumsily stitched with fishing line, and mended them with tiny invisible stitches. Caleb would come in from the cold to find the cabin warm, the smell of drying herbs cutting the scent of wood smoke. He would watch her sitting by the fire, her head bent over her work, and he would feel a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. He was grateful, and he was terrified. The first shift happened on a Tuesday night. The wind was howling outside, a banshee scream that made the logs groan. Inside, the lamp cast a circle of yellow light over the table. They were sitting close. The table was small enough that their knees were almost touching. Caleb was repairing a bridle. Mara was darning a sock. The silence was comfortable. Caleb looked up. The light caught the curve of Mara's cheek, softening the hard lines of her face. She looked younger in the lamplight, less hunted. A loose strand of dark hair had fallen across her eyes. She blew it away, but it fell back. Without thinking, Caleb reached out. His hand moved toward her face. He meant to tuck the hair behind her ear, a gesture of simple affection, something a husband might do. His fingers brushed the air an inch from her skin. Mara went still. She did not flinch this time. She did not pull away. She looked up. Her eyes locked onto his. Her breathing stopped. Caleb froze. His hand hovered there, large and scarred, caught between intent and retreat. He saw the pulse fluttering in the hollow of her throat. "Mara," he whispered. She did not speak. She leaned forward, just a fraction of an inch. It was a dare. It was a surrender. She leaned into the space where his hand was, bridging the gap until her skin brushed his rough fingertips. The contact was electric. Caleb cupped her cheek. Her skin was rough from the wind, but warm. Her eyes were wistfully dark, searching his face for any sign of the violence she feared. He leaned in. She did not retreat. Their lips met. It was not a gentle, courtly kiss. It was the collision of two people who had been starving for a long time, brief, hard, and desperate. Caleb tasted coffee and fear and a sudden, overwhelming sweetness. He pulled back. His breath came ragged. He was shaken by the intensity of it. Mara stared at him, her lips parted, her hand rising to touch her mouth. She looked terrified, not of him, but of the want in her own eyes. "I should check the horses," Caleb said. His voice cracked. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He grabbed his coat and bolted for the door. He needed the cold air to cool the fire in his blood. Mara stayed at the table, touching her cheek where his hand had been. The intimacy brought new dangers. The closer they got, the more the secrets chafed. That evening, as the fire burned down to embers, Mara pushed harder. "You live like a monk," she said, looking around the sparse cabin. "You work until your hands bleed. You speak only when necessary. And you have a scar on your face that looks like it was made by a skinning knife. Yet you claim you are just a simple homesteader." Caleb looked up from the harness he was oiling. "I am a homesteader. You are hiding," she said. Her voice was sharp, probing, just like me. "But you demand my truth while keeping yours locked in a box." Caleb set the harness down. The leather creaked in the silence. He looked at the fire, the flames reflected in his dark eyes. He could lie. He could tell her it was a farming accident. But he remembered the terror in her eyes during the storm, the way she had flinched when he touched her arm. Lies would not build a floor strong enough to hold them. "I was in Abilene," Caleb said. The words tasted like ash. 10 years ago, I was young, and I thought I was hard. There was a card game. A man thought I was cheating. I was not." Mara sat very still, her hands resting in her lap. "He pulled a knife," Caleb continued, touching the jagged line on his jaw. He opened my face. He was drunk and he was slow. I was not drunk. He paused. I broke his neck. The log in the fire settled with a shower of sparks. It was a fair fight, Caleb said. His voice was devoid of emotion. The law said so. Law. But the law does not wash your hands. I killed a man, Mara. I felt the life go out of him. And I found that I did not like the part of me that was good at it. He looked at the flames, so I came here. I walk away from fights now. I keep my head down. He looked at her, expecting fear. Instead, he saw a strange dark recognition in her eyes. You killed to survive, she said. There is no shame in that. There is a key, Caleb said. There is always a cost, she replied. The trick is finding someone else to pay it. The words hung in the air between them. Heavy with meaning, neither of them fully understood yet. 2 days later, they rode into Red Rock to make it legal. The town had not changed. It was still a collection of weather-beaten wood and prejudices held together by mud. They went to the small white church that doubled as the courthouse on weekdays. Reverend Caldwell looked at Mara's worn boots and Caleb's scarred face with a pinched expression. Do you, Caleb Mercer, take this woman? The Reverend asked. His tone implied that Caleb was making a grave error. I do, Caleb said. His voice was steady. And do you, Mara Quinn, take this man? Mara looked at Caleb for a moment. Her mask slipped. She looked tired. She looked at his shoulders, broad and heavy, and the way he stood between her and the door. I do, she said. They signed the ledger. Her signature was jagged, the letters leaning forward like they were running into the wind. When they walked out onto the wooden steps, the air felt heavier. They were man and wife now, but the real tests were only beginning. Deputy Tom Hale was a man who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes. He was young, handsome in a slick city way, with a mustache that was waxed to sharp points. He worked for the sheriff, but everyone in the county knew he belonged to Silas Roar. He rode into the yard a week after the wedding, just as Caleb was chopping wood. Mara was on the porch, shaking out a rug. Afternoon, Hale called out, swinging down from his horse with practiced ease. He tipped his hat to Mara. Mrs. Mercer, a pleasure to see a lady's touch on this place. Mara went still. She folded the rug slowly, her eyes fixing on Hale like he was a wolf at the tree line. Deputy, Caleb said, driving the axe into the stump. What brings you out? Just riding the rounds, Hale said, walking closer. He moved with a swagger that set Caleb's teeth on edge. Mr. Roar likes to make sure the new families are settling in well. Heard you got hitched, wanted to pay my respects. Hale's eyes drifted over Mara, lingering on her figure in a way that felt like a physical touch. You have done well for yourself, Mercer. She is a fine-looking woman. A bit sturdy, maybe, but that is good for the winters. State your business, Hale, Caleb said. He stepped between the deputy and the porch. Hale smiled, showing white teeth. Just checking, Caleb, just checking. You know, we have had reports of some unsavory types drifting in from the territories. Women with debts, women running from the law, just making sure everything is legitimate. He looked past Caleb to Mara. You have papers, I assume. Mrs. Mercer, identification. My husband has my papers, Mara said. Her voice was flat, metallic. Of course, Hale said. He mounted his horse. He looked down at Mara one last time. You take care now. It is a dangerous country for a woman with a past. He rode off, whistling. Mara stood on the porch. Her face was gray. She dropped the rug. He knows, she whispered. He knows nothing, Caleb said, though he did not believe it. He is fishing. He is a hunter, Mara said. She turned to Caleb, gripping his arm. Her fingers dug into his muscle. You need to clean the rifles, Caleb. Not just the shotgun, the repeaters. And we need to keep the horses in the corral at night, not the pasture. Mara, you are safe here. No, she hissed. Men like that do not come to talk about grazing rights. He was measuring the drop on you. He was counting the exits. Caleb looked at the dust settling behind the deputy. He felt a crushing weight of guilt. He had promised her a home. He had promised safety. And now the very ground they stood on felt like a trap. That night the wind died, leaving a silence that was even louder. Caleb lay on his pallet, staring at the ceiling. He had cleaned the Winchester repeater. It was leaning against the wall, loaded. He heard Mara tossing in the bed. She was whimpering. Low sounds of distress that tore at his heart. Then she screamed. It was a raw, blood-curdling sound. Caleb was on his feet in a second. Mara, she scrambled out of the bed, tangled in the quilts. Her eyes were wide and unseeing. She was asleep, but she was fighting, flailing at the air, striking invisible hands. No, no, I paid, I paid. She bolted for the door, running blind, fueled by a nightmare that was bleeding into the room. Caleb moved to intercept her. He stepped in front of the door. She slammed to a halt. Seeing a large, dark figure blocking her escape, she gasped, shrinking back, raising her hands to protect her face. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. Let me out, she sobbed. Please, let me out. Caleb stood there. His instinct was to grab her, to shake her awake, to hold her until she stopped shaking. But he remembered the horse. He remembered the flinch. If he grabbed her now, he would be just another man using his strength to hold her down. He lowered his hands. He stood perfectly still, a solid shadow against the wood. I am not stopping you, Mara, he said softly. The door is not locked, but you are awake. You are in our cabin. There is no one here but me. She stared at him, her chest heaving. She looked at the door. She looked at his empty hands. She looked at his face illuminated by the dying embers of the fire. She blinked, the nightmare slowly receding, replaced by the reality of the rough-hewn logs and the man who was refusing to touch her without permission. Caleb, she whispered. I am here, he said. I am right here. She let out a long, broken sound. She took a step toward him, then another. Her legs gave out. She collapsed forward. Caleb caught her. He did not grab. He simply received her weight as she fell into him. He slid down the wall with her, settling onto the floorboards, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. It was the sound of a dam breaking. Caleb held her. He rested his chin on the top of her head, rocking her slightly. He felt the dampness of her tears on his shirt. He felt the trust she was placing in him, heavy and fragile as glass. I have you, he murmured into the dark. I have you. Outside, a wolf howled, closer than before. Caleb tightened his hold. His eyes were open, staring into the shadows, ready to tear the throat out of anything that tried to hurt her again. Winter arrived not as a guest, but as a siege. The rolling grasslands were now locked under a crust of early snow that crunched like broken glass beneath a boot. The sky lowered itself, pressing down on the valley with a heavy leaden gray. Supplies were running dangerously low. They needed flour, coffee, and salt to cure the last of the venison. The trip to town was a necessity, not a choice. Red Rock was huddled against the cold. Smoke pumped from every chimney. The streets were frozen mud. As they walked toward the mercantile, Caleb felt the eyes on them. It was heavier than before. The gossip had curdled into something sour. They entered the store. The warmth was stifling after the ride. Mr. Henderson was behind the counter, weighing nails for a farmer. When he saw Mara, his hands stilled. He wiped them on his apron. His eyes darted to the back of the store. Mr. Mercer, Henderson said. His voice was tight. Mrs. Mercer. Henderson, Caleb nodded. We need 50 pounds of flour and coffee. Mara moved to the dry goods section. She reached out to touch a bolt of flannel, checking the weave. Do not touch what you cannot buy, a voice said. Deputy Hale stepped out from behind a stack of crates. He was smiling, but his eyes were flat and hard like polished stones. He was chewing on a matchstick. I'm checking the quality, Mara said. Deputy, that is customary for paying customers. Paying customers, Hale said. He moved closer, invading her space. He smelled of bay rum and stale tobacco. But we have had some inventory go missing lately, Mrs. Mercer. Small things, silver buttons, a pocket watch. Funny how things disappear when strangers come to town. The store had gone quiet. The farmer with the nails watched, eyes wide. Caleb stepped between them. He moved with deceptive slowness, placing his large frame as a shield. Are you accusing my wife of something, Hale? Just doing my job, Mercer, Hale said, looking up at Caleb with a sneer. Just asking questions. Maybe she should turn out her pockets, just to be sure. She will do no such thing, Caleb said. His voice was a low growl. "We are here to buy flour. If you have a warrant, show it. If not, step back. I do not need a warrant to stop a thief," Hale said. He lunged forward, grabbing for Mara's arm. It was a setup. Caleb saw it a second too late. Hale was not trying to find stolen goods. He was trying to provoke a fight. He wanted Caleb to swing. He wanted a reason. Mara was faster. She twisted away from Hale's grip. But as she moved, Hale's other hand flashed out and knocked her reticule from her grasp. It hit the floor, spilling its contents. A handkerchief, a few coins, and a silver pocket watch that slid across the floorboards. The silence was deafening. Hale laughed. It was a dreary, triumphant sound. "Well now, look at that, Sheriff Miller's missing watch. I wondered where that got to." "I did not take that," Mara said. Her face was white, her eyes blazing with shock and rage. "He planted it." "You saw him. He knocked the bag and dropped it." "I saw nothing of the sort," Hale said smoothly. He bent and picked up the watch. "I saw a thief getting caught." Sheriff Miller, a heavy man with a face like a bulldog, lumbered in from the street. He looked at the watch in Hale's hand, then at Mara. "That is my watch," Miller grunted. "You stealing from the lawn now, girl?" "It is a lie," Caleb said. His hands were curled into fists at his sides. The violence was roaring in his ears, a red tide rising. He wanted to tear Hale's throat out. He could do it. He could break him before the sheriff cleared leather. But he saw the way Hale's hand hovered near his gun. He saw the gleam of anticipation in the deputy's eyes. They wanted him to fight. They wanted to kill him in self-defense and leave Mara alone in a cell. Caleb forced his hands to open. The effort made his arms tremble. "She did not take it," Caleb said. His voice shook with restrained fury. Hale threw it when he grabbed her. Mr. Henderson saw it. The farmer saw it. He turned to the shopkeeper. "Henderson, tell them." Henderson looked at the floor. He shuffled his feet. "I was weighing nails, Caleb. I didn't see clear." "Cowardice." It was a thick, suffocating blanket in the room. "You are coming with us," Miller said, reaching for Mara. "No," Caleb said. He stepped forward, his hand resting on the sheriff's chest. It was a gentle touch, but immovable. "You are not putting her in a cell, Miller. You know this is a game. You know Hale. If you take her, you take me. And if you take me, I will make sure the circuit judge hears about how you run this town when he comes through in spring." Miller hesitated. He was corrupt, but he was also lazy. "Fine," Miller spat. "Take her home. But she does not come back into this town until this is sorted. And if anything else goes missing, Mercer, I will not be asking nicely." "Get out," Hale whispered, leaning close. "Run along, little bird, before the cage closes." They walked out. The shame burned hotter than the wind. Then a voice called out from the boardwalk. "Wait." They turned. Elizabeth Crowley stood there. She was a tall woman in black widow's weeds, her face lined and severe. She was the town midwife and schoolteacher, a woman who had birthed half the town and taught the other half to read. She was the only person in Red Rock who scared the sheriff. She walked up to them. She did not look at Caleb. She looked at Mara. "I was across the street," Elizabeth said clearly. Her voice carried. "I saw through the window. I saw his hand in his vest before he reached for you. It was a sleight of hand, a cheap parlor trick." Mara looked at her, stunned. "You saw?" "I have eyes," Elizabeth said. "And I know Tom Hale. He is a dog that bites when his master whistles." She reached into her basket and pulled out a small sack of coffee beans. She pressed it into Mara's hand. "It is not much," Elizabeth said, "but it will get you through the week. Go home. Do not let them see you hang your head. You have done nothing wrong but exist in a place that hates wild things." "Thank you," Caleb said. His voice was thick. Elizabeth stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "Watch your back, Caleb. Roar is moving." This was not about a watch. It was a test to see if you would break. Caleb looked at the dust settling behind the deputy. A test, and they had almost failed it. The ride home was a funeral procession. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the echo of Hale's laughter and the memory of Henderson looking at the floor. When they got inside the cabin, Mara did not take off her coat. She stood in the center of the room, shivering. It was not the cold. It was the adrenaline crash, the humiliation vibrating in her bones. She dropped the sack of coffee on the table. It made a dull thud. "I have to leave," she said. Caleb was latching the door. He turned. "What? I have to go." Her voice rose, cracking. She began to pace, her hands tearing at the buttons of her coat. "They will not stop. You saw them. The law belongs to them. They will plant something else. Or they will come out here and find a reason to arrest me." She was unraveling. The stoic survivor was gone, replaced by a terrified woman who saw the walls closing in. "I cannot go to jail, Caleb. I cannot be in a cage. I will die." "Mara," Caleb said, moving toward her. "No," she shouted, backing away. "You do not understand. You think this is just a town feud. You think this is just a bad deputy. It is a trap. It is always a trap." She was grabbing her reticule, looking for the door. "I bring it with me. I am cursed. Caleb, I am poison to you. If I stay, they will destroy you to get to me. I have to run." Caleb caught her. He did not grab her arms. He wrapped his arms around her body, pinning her arms to her sides, pulling her hard against his chest. It was a bear hug, a containment. "Stop," he said into her hair. "Stop running." She fought him. She kicked at his shins. She struggled. She sobbed. "Let me go. They will take me. Let me go. I will not," Caleb said. He held her tight, absorbing her panic, letting her thrash against his solidity. "I am not letting you go. You are my wife. You are home." She fought until her strength gave out. The fight drained out of her, leaving her limp in his arms, weeping uncontrollably. She slid down and he went with her, kneeling on the floorboards in the pool of lantern light. She pulled back, looking at him. Her face was streaked with tears, red and swollen. "They said I was a thief," she choked out. "They looked at me like I was dirt." "Do you believe them, Caleb? Do you look at me and see a thief?" Caleb took her face in his hands. His thumbs wiped away the tears. His eyes were dark, steady, and absolutely clear. "I see a woman who has survived hell," he said. "I see a woman who works until her hands bleed. I see a woman who saved my life in a storm." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I believe you, Mara. I do not care what they say. I do not care what they plant. I believe you." The words hit her harder than a physical blow. In her life, truth had always been what men with power decided it was. To be believed, simply, quietly, without condition, was a foreign language. She let out a ragged breath. "Caleb." The distance between them vanished. It was not a decision. It was a collapse. She surged forward and he met her. The kiss was desperate. It tasted of salt tears and desperation. It was a claiming. Caleb's hands moved from her face to her back, pulling her closer, trying to fuse her broken pieces together with his own strength. Mara gripped his shirt, pulling him down, needing the weight of him to anchor her to the earth. He shifted, pressing her back toward the floor, his body covering hers, shielding her. Then he stopped. He pulled back, his breathing harsh, his eyes black with want, but his hands stilled on her waist. Mara looked up at him, her lips swollen, her eyes asking a question. "Not like this," Caleb gasped. "Not because you are scared, not because you want to forget." He smoothed the hair back from her forehead. His touch was trembling, but gentle. "When we are together, Mara, it will be because you chose it, not because you are running from something else. I will not be another thing that happened to you. I want to be the thing you choose." Mara stared at him. The respect in his eyes was terrifying. It demanded more from her than submission. It demanded her whole self. She sat up, her hand touching his scarred cheek. "I am not running from you," she whispered. "I know," Caleb said, "but we have a fight to finish first." He helped her up. They sat at the table, the adrenaline fading into weary resolve. "Tell me," Caleb said. "Tell me what you are really afraid of. It is not just the jail cell." Mara looked at the fire. She pulled a locket from inside her dress, a small tarnished silver oval on a leather thong. She opened it. Inside was not a picture, but a tiny folded scrap of paper. "I told you I ran from a man," she said. "His name is not important, but he worked for men like Roar. He ran a dance hall in the camps, but it was not just dancing." She took a breath. "I signed a paper. I was starving. I was 16. I signed a contract for domestic service. I thought it meant cleaning. Her voice dropped. It meant I belonged to the house. For 5 years, I ran after 2. She looked at Caleb. If they find that paper, if they connect Mara Quinn to the name I used then, the law says I am in breach of contract. They can drag me back legally. They can make me work off the debt. She closed her eyes. And the debt never ends, Caleb. They add interest for every day you are gone. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. It was not just bullying, it was slavery with a seal of approval. That is why Hale is pushing, Caleb said. Roar buys debts, he buys contracts. If he finds out who you are, he owns me, Mara finished. That is why I have to run. I would rather freeze in a past than go back to that room. You are not going back, Caleb said. His voice was iron. We are going to fight this, but we cannot fight it with guns. We need proof that the contracts are illegal. We need a judge who is not bought. Mara looked at him. There is no such thing. Yes, there is, Caleb said. In Helena, Marshal Davis. He is a federal marshal. He hates Roar. He has tried to pin crimes on him for years, but we have no evidence. Then we get evidence, Caleb said. We find out where Roar keeps his records, and we take them. Mara stared at him. You would risk your life for me? I would burn this world down for you, Caleb said quietly. But I would rather build a new one. 2 days later, Elizabeth Crowley rode out to the ranch. She practically fell out of the saddle when she reached the yard. Her face was gray with exhaustion and fear. You have to move, Elizabeth gasped. Today. Now, come inside, Mara said, pulling her toward the warmth. Inside, Elizabeth drank coffee with shaking hands. They came to my house last night, Hale and 2 others. They tore up my books. They broke my jars. They told me that if I continued to conspire with criminals, I would be unfit to teach the children. She looked at Caleb. But that is not the worst of it. I heard them talking. The warrant is signed. Judge Taggart, he is Roar's creature. He signed it yesterday. A warrant for what? Mara asked. They are coming for you tomorrow morning, Elizabeth said. Not to question you, to take you to the county lockup for contract fraud and theft. Once you are in that cell, you never come out. We have to go to Helena, Mara said. We have to find Marshal Davis. You cannot go without proof, Elizabeth said. Stories will not work against a warrant signed by a judge. The ledger, Caleb said. You said Roar keeps records. Elizabeth nodded. Roar has a ledger. He keeps it in the safe at the land office where his nephew works. I used to teach the children of the county clerk. Before he died, I helped organize his papers. I saw things. She pulled a folded paper from her sleeve. He brings women in from the east, from the camps. He pays their way, then charges them double. He holds their papers until they pay it off. They never pay it off. Hale enforces the collections. Mara scanned the list. Her finger stopped at a line. Transport, Denver to Red Rock. 7 women, contract labor. This is it, Mara said. This is the scheme. If we can get that ledger, it is a federal crime. Peonage, it was outlawed. There is a marshal in Helena, Elizabeth said. Marshal Davis. He is a hard man, but he hates Roar. The nephew drinks, Caleb said, and he leaves the office unlocked when he visits the saloon on Friday nights. Tonight is Friday, Elizabeth confirmed. The next morning, before they could act, a rider appeared on the ridge. It was not Hale. It was a man in a long duster coat, his face obscured by a scarf. He sat a magnificent black stallion that looked too expensive for a working cowboy. The man did not draw a weapon. He held up a gloved hand. Mr. Mercer, the man said. His voice was cultured, smooth, and utterly terrifying. Mrs. Mercer, who are you? Caleb demanded, raising his rifle. I am a messenger. From Mr. Roar. He sends his regards. The man reached into his coat. Caleb tensed, finger on the trigger. But the man pulled out a piece of paper, a yellowed folded document. He tossed it onto the snow. Mr. Roar has come into possession of an interesting contract, the man said. It seems he purchased the assets of a defunct mining operation in the Dakotas, including their outstanding labor debts. Mara made a small strangled sound. He recognized the description, the writer said. A striking woman. Hard to forget. The writer smiled beneath his scarf. Mr. Roar is a reasonable man. He wants what is his. He invites Mrs. Mercer to come to town tomorrow to discuss the terms of her repayment. He feels she could work off the debt at his ranch. He has a large house. He needs staff. She is not going anywhere, Caleb said. If she does not come, the writer continued, as if Caleb had not spoken, then Mr. Rohrer will be forced to seek compensation elsewhere. He understands you have a fine herd of cattle, Mr. Mercer, and a barn that looks quite flammable in this dry winter air. He gathered his reins. Noon tomorrow, Mrs. Mercer, or we burn you out. The choice is yours. He wheeled the horse and galloped away. Caleb and Mara stood in the silence. The paper lay on the snow between them, a yellow stain on the white. Caleb looked at Mara. Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry. She shifted the shotgun in her hands. She pumped the action. The sound echoed like a gavel drop. We are not running, she said. No, Caleb said. He looked at the smoke trail of the rider. We are not running. They spent the rest of the day preparing. They moved the bulk of the winter's stores out of the cabin. Caleb pried up the floorboards in the tack room of the barn and cached the food there, wrapped in oilcloth. If Rohr's men burned the cabin, they would not starve. Mara took charge of the horses. They led the animals to a deep blind gulch, a quarter-mile behind the house. The gulch was choked with scrub oak and shadowed by a limestone overhang, a natural hide that broke the wind and hid the steam of the horses' breath. It is not enough to hide them, Mara said. We have to make them look like they are gone, driven off. She worked with terrifying efficiency, brushing out hoof prints with a pine bough as they walked back. That night, they went over the plan. We go tonight, Caleb said. We get the ledger, then we ride north, cross the river at Miller's Ford, cut through the timber to the rail stop at Silver Creek. We can catch the morning train to Helena. The ford is dangerous in this ice, Mara said. It is the only way to bypass the patrols on the main road, Caleb said. We have no choice. Mara nodded. Then let us go. They left the ranch at dusk. They did not look back. They took only the horses, their weapons, and the clothes on their backs. Red Rock was loud on a Friday night. Music and laughter spilled from the saloon. Yellow light pooled on the snow. Caleb and Mara tethered their horses in the alley behind the livery. In the deep shadows, stay with the horses, Caleb whispered. No, Mara said, I know locks, and I can read a ledger faster than you. We go together. They moved through the shadows like ghosts. The land office was a small brick building on the corner. The front was dark. They went to the back door. Mara tried the handle. Locked. She pulled a hairpin from her braid, worked it into the mechanism. Her ear pressed to the wood. She twisted, probed, waited. Click. She pushed the door open. They slipped inside. The office smelled of stale cigar smoke and ink. The safe was in the corner, a heavy iron box. But as Elizabeth had predicted, the door was not fully spun shut. The nephew was careless. Mara pulled it open. Inside were stacks of deeds and a thick leather-bound book. She opened the book to the recent entries, scanned the pages in the moonlight filtering through the window. Here, she whispered, her fingers shaking. November, transport fees, deductions, and here, a payment to Sheriff Miller for processing. Her eyes widened. It is all here. She tucked the heavy book into her coat. Let us go, Caleb hissed. They were halfway to the door when the front handle rattled. They froze. I forgot my tobacco, a voice slurred. It was the nephew. The key turned in the front lock. Window, Caleb whispered. He shoved the sash of the back window up. It groaned in the frame. The front door opened. Who is there? The nephew shouted, fumbling for a lantern. Go! Caleb boosted Mara through the window. She landed in the snow of the alley. Caleb vaulted after her just as a gunshot blew out the glass above his head. Thieves, the nephew screamed. Thieves at the office! The town erupted. Men poured out of the saloon. Caleb and Mara sprinted for the horses. They hit the saddles just as Deputy Hale came running around the corner. Pistol drawn! Stop them! Hale shouted. He fired wildly. A bullet tore a splinter from the livery wall near Mara's head. They spurred the horses, tearing out of the alley and into the open street. They galloped past the mercantile, past the church, their horses' hooves throwing up clouds of frozen mud. Ride, Caleb roared. They hit the open prairie, the lights of Red Rock fading behind them. But the pursuit was instant. A posse was forming. Rohr's men were always ready. The chase was a nightmare of wind and ice. They rode hard to the north, pushing the horses to their limit. The wind bit through their coats, numbing their faces until they could not speak. Behind them, torches flickered in the distance like angry fireflies. The posse was tracking them. "The river," Mara shouted, pointing. The dark ribbon of the river cut across their path. It was not frozen solid. The current was too fast. It was a churning slurry of black water and jagged ice flows. "We have to cross," Caleb yelled. "They will cut us off at the bridge." They drove the horses into the water. The shock of the cold was instant and paralyzing. The horses screamed, thrashing against the current. The water rose to the saddle skirts. Ice battered against Caleb's legs, bruising bone. Mara's horse stumbled. She clung to the horn, the heavy ledger weighing her down. "Keep moving," Caleb shouted. He grabbed her rein. "Do not let him stop." They scrambled up the far bank, shivering violently, their clothes instantly freezing into stiff armor. They rode into the timber, the pine trees offering brief respite from the wind. They could see the torches of the posse on the other side of the river. The pursuers had stopped at the water, wary of the ice. They would have to go around to the bridge, costing them an hour. "We have time," Caleb wheezed, "but not much." They rode through the night. By the time the sky began to lighten, the horses were stumbling. They reached the outskirts of Silver Creek, a rail town with a depot and a telegraph line. The train to Helena was due at 8. They reined in at the top of a rise overlooking the town. "We made it," Mara whispered. She touched the ledger inside her coat. Caleb was looking back the way they had come. He saw them, riders, not the main posse, but a scout group, 3 men on fresh horses, cutting across the ridge. They were flanking them. They would reach the depot at the same time. And there were more dust clouds to the east. Roar had telegraphed ahead. He had men waiting. Caleb looked at the depot. It was a mile away. Then he looked at the narrow canyon trail that led down to it. "They are going to bottle us up," Caleb said. "If we ride down there together, they will pin us against the train tracks. They will shoot us before we get near the platform." Mara looked at him, fear dawning in her eyes. "So we fight. We have the rifles. We cannot win a fight against 10 men, Caleb said. "Not with you carrying the book." He turned his horse to face her. His face was battered by the wind, his eyes dark and calm. "Give me your hat," he said. "What?" "Give me your hat and your coat. Put on my duster. Take the ledger. Ride down the old creek bed to the water tower. Wait for the train to whistle. Do not get on until it is moving." "No," Mara said. She realized what he was doing. "No, Caleb, I am not leaving you." "They are looking for a man and a woman," Caleb said. "If I ride out along the ridge making noise, they will follow me. They will think I am trying to draw them off. They will think I have the book. They will kill you," Mara cried. She grabbed his arm. "They will try," Caleb said. "But I am hard to kill, and if they catch me, I am just a husband protecting his wife. I have no evidence on me. They can beat me, but they cannot hang me without the book. I cannot do this alone," she sobbed. "You have to," Caleb said. "You are the only one who can do it, Mara. You know the story. You have the voice. You take that book to Marshall Davis. You tell him everything." He leaned over and kissed her. It was a fierce, burning kiss, tasting of goodbyes. "And you come back for me," he whispered. "I swear it," she whispered. "Go," Caleb said. "Ride." He stripped off his duster and threw it to her. He took her hat and jammed it on his head. He wheeled the roan around. "Hey!" Caleb shouted at the approaching riders. He fired a shot into the air. "Over here, you sons of dogs! Come and get it!" He spurred his horse and galloped away from the town, riding silhouetted against the skyline. A perfect target. The riders turned. They took the bait. They spurred after him, yelling, firing their pistols. Mara watched him go. Her heart was tearing in half. She wanted to scream. She wanted to chase him. But she felt the weight of the ledger against her ribs. The names of the women, the dead friend, the future. She gritted her teeth. She pulled Caleb's heavy duster around her, shrinking into its warmth. She turned her exhausted mare toward the creek bed and the waiting train. She rode down into the shadows, alone, while the sound of gunfire echoed on the ridge behind her. The train carried Mara through the night. She huddled in the corner of the third-class car, wrapped in Caleb's duster. It smelled of him. Pine pitch, horses, and gun oil. She buried her nose in the collar, inhaling the scent like it was smelling salts. Focus, she told herself. You are not running away. You are running toward. Helena was a shock after the silence of the high plains. Brick buildings, crowded streets, noise and chaos. Mara moved through the crowd with her head down. She knew how to disappear. Walk with purpose but not haste. Look at no one but see everything. She found the office of the United States Marshal 2 streets over from the territorial courthouse. It was a sturdy stone building with iron bars on the windows. Marshal Davis was a man carved from granite, with a mustache the color of steel wool and eyes that had seen every variety of human sin. He looked up as Mara entered. He did not smile. "Help you, ma'am?" Mara approached the desk. Her hands were trembling, but she forced them to unbutton her coat. She reached in and pulled out the ledger. She slammed it onto the desk. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "My name is Mara Mercer," she said. Her voice was raspy from the cold ride, but it did not waver. "I am the wife of Caleb Mercer of Red Rock, and this book proves that Silas Rohr is running a slave trade under the guise of contract labor." Davis looked at the book. Then he looked at her. He saw the bruises of exhaustion under her eyes, the windburn on her cheeks, and the desperate, ferocious set of her jaw. "That is a heavy accusation, Mrs. Mercer," Davis rumbled. "Read the transport column for November," Mara said, "and the payments to Sheriff Miller." Davis opened the book, adjusted his spectacles. As he read, his expression did not change, but the lines around his mouth deepened. He turned a page, then another. He looked up. "Where is your husband?" "He stayed behind," Mara said. Her voice cracked, "just once. He drew them off so I could get this to you. If he is not dead, he is in their hands." Davis closed the book. He stood up. "Sit down, Mrs. Mercer," he said. "I am going to pour you a whiskey, and then you are going to tell me everything. Start from the beginning." The preliminary hearing was held 2 days later. The room was crowded. Word had spread that a woman was challenging the King of Red Rock. Mara sat at the plaintiff's table next to Marshal Davis. She wore a clean gray wool dress, severe and simple. She wore no hat. She wanted them to see her face. Rohr's lawyer was a man named Sterling, dressed in a suit that cost more than Caleb's farm. "Your Honor," Sterling boomed, "this is a farce. We have here a woman of questionable virtue, a woman who admits to fleeing a lawful contract in the Dakota Territory, a woman who is currently wanted by the sheriff of Red Rock for theft." He turned and pointed at Mara. "She has stolen private business records, and now she weaves a fantastical tale of slavery to cover her own crimes. She is a runaway, Your Honor, a dance hall girl who trapped a lonely rancher into marriage." The murmurs in the room were low and ugly. Dance hall girl, immoral, used goods. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marshal Davis stood up. "Your Honor, the ledger speaks for itself, but Mrs. Mercer can speak to the context." "Mrs. Mercer," the judge looked over his spectacles. "Stand up." Mara stood, her knees shook, but she locked them. "Did you sign a contract with the mining company?" Sterling asked, smirking. "I signed a paper," Mara said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room. "I was 16 years old. I was starving. The man told me I would be washing sheets. He did not tell me I would be locked in a room. He did not tell me that my wages would be docked for the air I breathed until I owed more than I could ever earn." "But you signed it," Sterling pressed. "You chose that life." "I chose to survive," Mara said. She turned to face the room. She looked at the faces of the strangers, shopkeepers, wives, drifters. "You call it a choice," she said. "But when a trap snaps shut on a wolf's leg, does the wolf choose to chew off its own foot to get free? Or does it just want to live?" The room went quiet. "I am not a ledger entry," Mara said. "I am not a debt to be collected. I am a woman. I have a name. I have a husband who is bleeding in a cell right now because he believes I am a person. Not property," she looked at the judge. "Mr. Rohr thinks he can own people because he has money, but the law is supposed to be the one place where money does not count." Her voice broke. then steadied. I am not asking for pity. I am asking for the right to walk out my own door without looking over my shoulder. She paused. Is that not what this country is for? Judge Ambrose stared at her for a long moment. He looked at the ledger open on his bench. He looked at Sterling, who had lost his smirk. Marshall Davis, the judge said. This ledger provides probable cause for a federal investigation into peonage and kidnapping. I am issuing a warrant for the arrest of Silas Rohr and his associates, and I am authorizing you to deputize a posse to execute it. He banged his gavel. And Mr. Sterling, if you interrupt me again, I will hold you in contempt. The return to Red Rock was not a victory parade. It was an invasion. Marshall Davis gathered 6 men, hard-bitten deputies who rode for the federal wage. They loaded their saddlebags with ammunition. The sky had turned a bruising purple, threatening snow. They rode hard. Mara rode with them. Davis had tried to leave her in Helena, but she had looked him in the eye and said 3 words. He is my husband. Davis had given her a horse. They reached Red Rock at dawn on the 2nd day. The town was waking to a gray, freezing morning. The marshal rode straight to the jailhouse. He kicked the door open. Sheriff Miller was sleeping at his desk. He woke with a start to find a Winchester pointed at his nose. United States Marshal, Davis barked. You are relieved of duty. Miller, get the keys. They found Caleb in the back cell. Mara made a sound that was half sob, half scream when she saw him. He was lying on the cot, his shirt stained with dried blood, his face swollen, his eyes glazed with pain and dehydration. Open it, Davis ordered Miller. The sheriff fumbled with the keys. The moment the lock clicked, Mara was inside. Caleb tried to sit up. He groaned, clutching his ribs. Mara, he croaked. He sounded like his throat was full of gravel. I am here, she wept, falling to her knees beside the cot. She did not care about the blood or the filth. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Caleb's good eye found her face. He raised a shaking hand to touch her hair. You did it. We have the warrants, she whispered. Davis is here. We have the posse. He let out a breath, a shuddering release of days of tension. He leaned his forehead against hers. His skin was hot, feverish. I knew, he whispered. I knew you would come back. They moved him to the livery stable to get him water and clean his wounds. Mara washed the dried blood from his face. She touched the purple bruising on his ribs with trembling fingers. Hale did this, she said. Her voice was cold. He wanted me to break, Caleb said. He took her hand and kissed the palm. He lost. But the war was not over. As they were saddling fresh horses, a boy ran into the stable, the son of the blacksmith. Fire, the boy yelled. Fire at the Mercer place. Caleb froze. He looked at Mara. Roar, Caleb said. He knows the marshal is here. He is burning the evidence, or he is drawing us out. It is a trap, Mara said. We have to go, Caleb said. The cattle, the house, let it burn, Mara said. We have the warrants. No, Caleb said. He is not just burning the house. He is waiting for us. If we do not go, he will come here. He will turn the town into a shooting gallery. Marshal Davis checked the load in his shotgun. Then we go to him, but we go on our terms. The landscape between the town and the ranch had turned into a nightmare of mud and ice. They saw the smoke before they saw the fire, a black pillar rising against the gray sky. When they crested the ridge overlooking the ranch, the devastation was clear. The barn was fully engulfed, flames roaring against the wind. The cabin was smoking, the roof catching fire, and there were men waiting. Silas Rohr had not run. He had dug in. His men were positioned behind the water trough, behind the stone wall of the root cellar, and in the stand of cottonwoods. Federal Marshal, Davis roared. His voice boomed over the wind. Throw down your weapons. I have a warrant for Silas Rohr. The answer was a rifle shot that kicked up snow inches from Davis's horse. Take cover, Davis yelled. The firefight erupted. It was chaotic and brutal. The wind tore the smoke apart, making it hard to see. Horses screamed and scattered. Caleb and Mara bailed off their horses and scrambled for the cover of a rocky outcrop. Caleb had a rifle now, and despite his injuries, his hands were steady. He fired, working the lever action with a grim rhythm, "Stay down," Caleb shouted at Mara as a bullet chipped the rock near her head. "I can shoot," she yelled back, leveling her own rifle. The federal deputies were flanking Roar's men. The discipline of the marshal's posse was turning the tide. Roar's hired guns were mercenaries. They were not willing to die for a paycheck against federal badges. One by one, they broke cover and ran for the Badlands. "They are running," Davis shouted. "Push forward!" But Roar was not running, and neither was Hale. In the confusion of the smoke and the advancing line, Mara saw movement near the burning barn. She saw Roar's black stallion, and she saw Hale. Hale was not firing at the deputies. He was moving low, circling the flank. He was coming for the rocks where Caleb and Mara were pinned. Caleb was reloading, focused on the cottonwoods where Roar was shouting orders. "Caleb!" Mara screamed. Hale surged out of the smoke like a demon. He did not go for Caleb. He went for the leverage. He lunged at Mara. She tried to bring her rifle around, but he was too close. He knocked the barrel aside and grabbed her by the hair, wrenching her backward. She screamed, clawing at his face. Hale jammed the barrel of his revolver against her temple. He dragged her out into the open, using her body as a shield. "Hold your fire!" Hale screamed. "Hold it, or I blow her brains out!" The shooting stopped. The silence that followed was heavy with the roar of the fire. Caleb spun around. The color drained from his face. He froze, his rifle half raised. He saw Hale's wild eyes. He saw the gun pressed against Mara's skin. He saw Mara's eyes, terrified, but locked on his. "Drop it, Mercer!" Hale shouted. "Drop the gun!" Marshal Davis and his men held their positions, weapons trained but unable to shoot. Hale had her tight. "Back off," Hale yelled. "We are leaving. I am taking her with me. Anyone follows, she dies." Roar rode out from the cottonwoods, looking calm amidst the ruin. "A sound negotiation," Roar called out. "Let us pass, Marshal. You can have the land. I will take the girl as collateral." Caleb stood in the snow, his chest heaving, his ribs screaming with pain. He looked at Hale. He saw the finger whitening on the trigger. He looked at Mara. She was not struggling anymore. She knew that if she moved, she died. The choice hung in the air, sharper than the cold. If Caleb trusted the law, he would drop the gun. He would let them take her. Hoping the marshal could track them, hoping to negotiate later. But he knew Hale. He knew Roar. If they took her now into the Badlands, he would never see her alive again. She would become another nameless woman, another shawl in the mud. But if he shot, Hale was using her as a shield. The target was impossible. An inch to the left, and he killed his wife. An inch to the right, and he missed. And Hale pulled the trigger. To take the shot, Caleb had to become the killer again. He had to summon the man from Abilene, the cold, dead-eyed machine that broke necks and did not feel remorse. He had to let the violence swallow him whole. "Drop it!" Hale screamed again, dragging Mara backward toward a waiting horse. Caleb looked at Mara. She blinked. It was a tiny movement, a signal. "Do not let them take me." Caleb stopped shaking. His breathing slowed. The world narrowed down to a tunnel. The fire, the wind, the marshal. It all faded. There was only the front sight of his Winchester, and the sliver of Tom Hale's face visible behind Mara's head. He raised the rifle. "No!" the marshal shouted. Caleb did not hear him. He was not a homesteader anymore. He was not a husband. He was a bullet. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle stock slammed against Caleb's shoulder. A brutal, familiar kick that reverberated through his bruised ribs. The sound of the shot cracked the frozen air. Sharper than the roaring of the burning barn, through the smoke and the swirling snow, Caleb watched the result. Not with triumph, but with cold, detached clarity. The bullet did not take Deputy Hale in the head. Caleb had shifted his aim in the fraction of a second before the hammer fell. The lead slug tore through Hale's right forearm. The one holding the revolver pressed to Mara's temple. Hale screamed, a high, thin sound that was swallowed by the wind. His hands spasmed. The gun flew from his grip, spinning into the snow. The impact spun him around, breaking his hold on Mara. "Run!" Caleb roared, working the lever of the Winchester. Mara did not need to be told. The moment the arm released her, she dropped to the ground, rolling into the depression of a frozen wagon rut. Just as the air above her head filled with lead, Roar's men, seeing their deputy fall, opened fire from the tree line. The marshal's deputies returned it, a chaotic volley that chewed up the bark of the cottonwoods. "Pull back," Roar shouted. His voice was not panicked. It was angry, the tone of a man whose property had misbehaved. "Get him on a horse. We are leaving." Caleb raised the rifle again, sighting on Roar's broad back as the rancher wheeled his stallion. It would be an easy shot, a center mass hit that would end the reign of the King of Red Rock in a heartbeat. The violence in Caleb's blood sang a dark, seductive song. "End it. Do it now." But he heard Mara's voice in his head. "We win with proof, not rage." If he shot Roar in the back, the ledger became worthless. The narrative would shift. Roar would die a martyr, a respected businessman murdered by a wild homesteader, and his network of debt and influence would simply pass to the next man in line. Caleb lowered the barrel. He watched as Roar's men dragged a bleeding, cursing Hale onto a horse and galloped away into the gray curtain of the storm. "They are running," Marshal Davis said, appearing beside Caleb. He kept his shotgun leveled. "They will hole up at the big ranch house. It is a fortress." Caleb did not answer. He dropped the rifle into the snow and ran toward the rut where Mara lay. She was pushing herself up, her face streaked with soot and snow. She was shaking. But when Caleb fell to his knees and reached for her, her hands grabbed his coat with a grip that was shockingly strong. "I am whole," she gasped, seeing the terror in his eyes. "He did not shoot. You hit him." Caleb pulled her into him, crushing her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the smell of smoke and life. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the beat of her heart against his. "I almost lost the shot," Caleb whispered, his voice cracking. "But you did not," Mara said fiercely. She pulled back, framing his bruised face with her frozen hands. "You did not miss, and you did not kill Roar." "I wanted to," Caleb admitted. "I know," she said, "but now we finish it the right way." The Triple R Ranch was not just a home. It was a monument to Silas Roar's vanity. The main house sat on a rise overlooking the valley, built of imported stone and timber. It was 2 hours later when the marshal's posse, reinforced by deputies from Helena and a grim-faced Caleb, crested the ridge. The storm had broken, leaving behind a sky of polished steel and a wind that cut like a razor. "He has men in the loft of the barn," Caleb said, scanning the layout, "and riflemen in the upper windows of the house." "He thinks we will not storm it," Davis said. "He thinks his lawyers in Helena are already filing injunctions to stop me." "He does not know about the ledger," Mara said. She was riding Caleb's spare horse, wrapped in a blanket, her face set like flint. "He thinks I am just a thief he can intimidate. He does not know we have the names." "Stay here," Caleb told her. "No," Mara said. "I am the witness. I am the evidence. I am going to the door." They rode down the slope, a slow, deliberate procession. They stopped 50 yards from the porch. The front door of the great house opened. Silas Roar stepped out. He held a glass of brandy in one hand. He was not dressed for a siege. He was dressed for a business meeting. His arrogance was a physical weight in the air. "Marshal Davis," Roar called out, his voice smooth, "you are trespassing, and you are harboring a fugitive. I suggest you hand Mrs. Mercer over to the local authorities and ride back to Helena before you make a career-ending mistake." "I have a federal warrant for your arrest, Roar," Davis shouted, "for peonage, kidnapping, and conspiracy." Roar laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound, based on the word of a hysterical woman and a homesteader with a criminal record. "No judge will sign that paper." "Based on your own bookkeeping," Davis said. He pulled the ledger from his saddlebag and held it up. Roar went still. The glass of brandy did not waver, but his knuckles turned white. "And witnesses," Caleb added. He guided his horse forward. "Elizabeth Crowley has given a statement, and your nephew in town. He does not like jail, Silas. He talked for an hour about how you move the women, about the false debts." The curtains in the upper windows shifted. The riflemen were listening. These were hired hands, men who worked for wages. They knew what federal charges meant. They knew that loyalty to Roar stopped where the hangman's noose began. "Lies," Roar spat, "all of it. You have nothing." Then the front door opened again. Deputy Hale stumbled out. He was pale, his right arm bound in a bloody sling. He held a pistol in his left hand, his eyes wild and feverish with pain and humiliation. "Kill them!" Hale screamed. "What are you waiting for? Shoot them down!" He raised the pistol, aiming wildly at Caleb. The moment stretched, thin and brittle as ice. Caleb saw the intent in Hale's eyes. The desperation of a man who knew his power was evaporating. Caleb's hand dropped to his revolver. He could draw. He could put a bullet in Hale's chest before the deputy could fire. It would be justified. It would be easy. But Caleb saw something else. He saw the hired men on the porch lowering their rifles. They were looking at Hale with disgust. They were looking at Roar, who was backing away from his own rabid dog. If Caleb shot, he started a war. If he waited, Caleb did not draw. He sat his horse, staring Hale down. "Put it down, Tom," Caleb said. His voice was not a shout. It was a command, heavy with the weight of a man who has mastered his own violence. "It is over. Look around you. No one is shooting. You are all alone." Hale looked at Roar. Roar turned his back on him. Hale looked at the men in the bunkhouse doorway. They looked away. The deputy let out a sob of rage. He fired. The shot went wide, kicking up snow near Mara's horse. Before Hale could cock the hammer again, Marshal Davis fired his shotgun. Not at Hale, but into the porch railing in front of him. The explosion of wood splinters sent Hale reeling backward. He tripped and fell hard on his wounded arm. Screaming, the fight went out of him. Two of the marshal's men were off their horses in seconds, rushing the porch, kicking the gun away, slapping irons on his wrists. Roar stood alone on the porch. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara urged her horse forward. She rode past Caleb, past the marshal. Until she was at the foot of the stairs, she looked down at Silas Roar. "You called me by a name in your book," Mara said. Her voice was clear, carrying over the wind. "You called me Asset 12. You called me a thief. You called me worse." Roar looked up at her, his lip curling. "You are what you have always been, girl. Dirt from the mining camps." "I am Mara Mercer," she said. "I am a citizen, and I am the woman who burned your kingdom down with nothing but the truth." She leaned down, her eyes locking onto his. "You do not get to name me," she said, "and you do not get to own me. Not today, not ever again." She straightened up and looked at the marshal. "Take him." Roar was not dragged away kicking and screaming. He surrendered with a sneer, adjusting his cuffs, telling Davis that his lawyers would have him out by dinner. He was loaded into a wagon, sitting stiff and upright, refusing to look at the people who watched him go. It was not a clean victory. There were no cheers from the townspeople who had ridden up to watch. There was only a quiet, uncomfortable shifting of feet. Men who had looked the other way for years now stared at their boots. They saw the ledger. They saw Hale in chains. They saw the truth of what they had tolerated. It was not a triumph, it was a reckoning. And reckonings are heavy things to carry. Caleb rode up beside Mara. He reached out and took her hand. "It is done," he said. "No," Mara said, watching the wagon disappear over the rise. "It has just started, but the hardest part is over." The return to the homestead was a journey into a different kind of reality. The barn was a blackened skeleton against the snow. The smell of wet ash hung heavy in the air. The cabin roof was scorched. The porch was half burned, but the main structure, the solid heartwood logs Caleb had hewn himself, still stood. They spent the first 2 days in a blur of exhaustion and labor. They had to secure the livestock that had scattered. They had to patch the roof before the next snow. They had to haul water and chop wood. The endless repetitive arithmetic of survival. But something had changed. On the third mow, a wagon appeared on the road. It was Titus, the old neighbor who had warned Caleb about the wild woman. He pulled up to the yard, his mule blowing steam. He climbed down and unloaded 3 sacks of oats and a side of cured beef. He placed them on the porch without a word. "Titus," Caleb said, stepping out, "I cannot pay for that yet." Titus spat tobacco juice into the snow. He looked at Mara, who was sweeping soot from the doorway. He lifted his hat, a small, stiff gesture of respect. "Heard what happened," Titus grunted. "Heard she stood up to Roar. Heard you did not shoot Hale when you could have. He kicked the dirt. Reckon I was wrong about the trouble. Or maybe I was right. But it was the kind of trouble this valley needed. He climbed back into his wagon. You need help raising a new barn. You send word. The boys and I. Well, we feel a bit foolish. We will come. That night, the wind died down. The cabin was warm, the stove glowing red. They had pushed the bed closer to the fire. Caleb sat on the edge, cleaning his rifle. Mara was brushing her hair, the long, dark strands shining in the firelight. She put the brush down. She walked over to him. She took the rifle from his hands and leaned it against the wall. Then she stood between his knees, her hands resting on his shoulders. You are quiet tonight, she said. I am thinking, Caleb said. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his head against her stomach. I am thinking about the man I was in Abilene, and the man I was on the porch with Hale. They are not the same man, Mara said. I wanted to kill him, Mara, Caleb said. His voice muffled against her dress. When I saw him holding you. The darkness was there. It was so close. But you did not, Mara whispered. She ran her fingers through his hair, tracing the line of the scar on his jaw. You chose. That is what matters. You chose to be Caleb Mercer. You chose to be my husband, not his executioner. She pulled back so she could look at his face. The bruises were fading, yellow and green shadows on his skin. We are not clean, Caleb, she said. I have my ghosts, you have yours. We are both scarred. We are both dangerous in our own way. Yes, Caleb said. Good, Mara said, because the world is hard, and I do not want a soft man. I want the man who can stand in the storm and not break. She leaned down and kissed him. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the fugitive. It was slow. It was deep. It was the kiss of a woman claiming her territory. Caleb stood up, lifting her with him. She wrapped her legs around his waist, and he carried her to the bed. The intimacy that followed was a conversation without words. It was steadiness and hunger intertwined. It was the feel of calloused hands on skin that had known too much cold. It was the sound of breath catching in the dark, a reaffirmation that they were alive, that they were safe, and that they belonged to no one but each other. Spring came late to the Montana Territory that year. The snow retreated reluctantly, revealing the black earth and the green shoots of new grass. The creek swelled with runoff, roaring through the coulees. Caleb and Mara stood on the porch of the cabin. The new barn was half-framed, the yellow pine bright against the weathered gray of the house. Neighbors had come to help raise it, men who had once looked the other way, women who had once whispered. They did not apologize, but they showed up with hammers and nails, and that was enough. A rider had come by that morning with the mail. There was a letter from Marshall Davis. Mara held it in her hand. Rohr stood trial last month, she said, reading the script. Convicted on 3 counts of peonage, 5 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. She looked up at Caleb. 15 years in the federal penitentiary. Caleb let out a long breath. And Hale? 7 years, Mara said, plus he lost his right hand to infection. He will never hold a gun again. She folded the letter. Davis says more women have come forward since the trial. 7 so far. The marshal's office in Dakota is opening investigations into 3 more operations based on the ledger. Caleb put his arm around her shoulders. He felt the solid warmth of her, the steel in her spine. She was not the plain, quiet bride he had asked for in his letter. She was something wilder, harder, and infinitely better. She leaned into him. They stood there, watching the shadow of a hawk circle over the grasslands. Do you ever think about what would have happened, Mara asked, if I had not gotten on that stage? Every day, Caleb said. And every day I thank God you did. She was quiet for a moment. I was so afraid, she said, when I got off that coach. I was sure you would be like the others. I was ready to run the moment you raised your hand. I know, Caleb said. But you did not, she said. You just reached out and took my trunk, and you told me I did not have to carry it alone. She looked up at him. That was the first time in 10 years anyone had offered to help me without wanting something in return. Caleb turned to face her. He took both her hands in his. Mara Mercer, he said, I have a question for you. She raised an eyebrow. We are already married, Caleb. I know, he said, but I never asked you properly. So I am asking now, he cleared his throat. Will you stay? Not because you have nowhere else to go, not because the law says you have to, but because you want to. Because this is home. Mara looked at him, at the cabin they had rebuilt together, at the barn rising in the spring sunshine, at the land that had tried to break them and failed. She smiled. It was the first real smile Caleb had ever seen on her face. Yes, she said, I will stay. She reached up and touched his face. Her hand rested on the scar that ran from his ear to his jaw. We are both marked, she said, but scars are just proof that we survived. They turned and looked at the horizon together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Are you afraid? Caleb asked. Mara considered the question. Yes, she said honestly. There will always be men like Roar. There will always be storms. There will always be wolves at the door. She squeezed his hand, but I am not running anymore. Neither am I, Caleb said. They turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door unlatched, ready for whatever the wind would bring next. And so ends the story of Caleb and Mara Mercer. Two broken people who found each other in the wildness of the Montana Territory. They learned that love is not about being whole. It is about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours. They learned that justice is worth fighting for, even when the cost is high. And they learned that home is not a place. It is a person who believes in you when the whole world says you are worthless. Thank you for journeying with me through the dust, in the snow, and the hard-won love of these two survivors. If their story moved you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you listening from today? And remember, no matter how dark the winter, spring always comes.